So we have both early, eyewitness, and multiple testimonies to this fact. Folks, this is the kind of data historians drool over. Number one, we've seen that Jesus was crucified and that the process killed him. Number two, we've seen the empty tomb. But wait, there's more. Fact number three, on a number of occasions we see that the disciples of Jesus believed that he had been resurrected and had appeared to them. And not only was this disciples, but it was the foes of Jesus as well. Let's deal with the first group, and that would have to do with the friends of Jesus, his disciples. This is testified by eyewitnesses who knew the disciples, namely Paul and Clement of Rome. These, again, they knew the disciples, and they were saying that the disciples were claiming that Jesus had risen from the dead. In addition, there is early oral tradition referred to as kerygma. It comes from the Greek word kerugma, which means the official and formal preaching of the disciples. And when we look at this, we find that the kerygma refers to resurrection. In fact, let me give you the primary example. It's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 7, in what scholars have identified as a creed. Now, in this creed, it says that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. Then he appeared to Peter, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 at one time, most of whom are still alive, but some have died. Then he appeared to James, then to all of the apostles. And then after that, Paul says he adds his own name to that list. Now, I wish I had time to get into how scholars and why they date this to within 5 years of the crucifixion and trace it to the disciples themselves. I don't have time, but if Mr. Ali would like to challenge this finding of the majority of scholars, I'd be happy to deal with it in the remainder of our debate this evening. In the meantime, we can conclude that the disciples were claiming that Jesus had been resurrected and had appeared to them. But we can go further. No less than 7 sources in antiquity attest that they were willing to suffer and die for those convictions that Jesus had been resurrected. Now, I'm not saying, and I want to be clear on this, I am not saying that this proves that Jesus rose. Because certainly people of other religious beliefs, and even non-religious beliefs like communism, they are willing to suffer and die for their convictions. However, we wouldn't accuse people who suffer and die for their convictions for dying for a known lie. And thus, we can show that the disciples were not only claiming that Jesus had been risen, but they really believed it. Liars make poor martyrs. That brings us to our second group of people, and that is the foes of Jesus. I want to look at right now one of the major foes, and that is Paul. Now, the record states that Paul was a persecutor of the church. He was arresting, beating, consenting to the deaths of Christians, and then he converted to one because he claimed that he experienced a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus, and it totally transformed his life. This testimony is documented not only by Paul himself, but confirmed by Acts, and also further corroborated by a very early oral tradition that said, "He who persecuted the church now promotes the faith he once sought to destroy." So we have both early, eyewitness, and multiple testimonies to this fact. Folks, this is the kind of data historians drool over. But we can go further because not only did Paul claim this, we can say he really believed it because 7 sources attest that he was willing to suffer and die for those convictions. We go to another foe, and that would be James. Now, this is going to be the only time this evening that as evidence for the resurrection, I'm going to appeal to the Gospels because I like data which is much earlier, and that way we can avoid discussions over the trustworthiness of the Gospels or the inerrancy of the New Testament. I want to go with facts that I can prove, and that's why I'm focusing on that. Nevertheless, historians still believe the testimony, the embarrassing testimony of the Gospels, that James, the brother of Jesus, as well as all of Jesus' brothers, were non-believers up through the time of his crucifixion. Then shortly afterward, we find James as a leader in the Church of Jerusalem. And then we find that 3 non-biblical sources, even a non-Christian source, says that James was willing to die, and did, for his beliefs that Jesus had been resurrected. What accounts for this transformation? Most scholars answer that by saying it's the appearance to James. and that it's reported in that early creed in 1 Corinthians 15 I mentioned a moment ago. Paula Fredrickson of Boston University comments, I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. That's what they say, and then all the historic evidence afterwards we have attest to that, the fact that that's what they saw. I'm not saying that they did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw. But I do know that as an historian, that they must have seen something.